Picture this. It is 1:08 a.m. You are lying in bed, and the lights are off.
Right.
The house is completely silent, and the only illumination in your entire room is that harsh, blue-white glow of your smartphone screen.
Oh, yeah, casting those weird, elongated shadows up on the ceiling.
Exactly. And you are doing that thing we all do, the mindless late-night scroll.
The neurochemistry of that exact moment is actually incredibly specific. I mean, your brain is just bathing in this low-level dopamine trip as you swipe through random stuff.
Right, absorbing absolutely nothing of importance, but you feel profoundly safe. You are in your sanctuary, the physical doors are locked, the world outside has just entirely shut down for the night.
Yeah, you were just floating in this comfortable, warm little digital bubble.
It is the most mundane, ordinary, universally relatable scenario imaginable. We all know this exact physical sensation, right? The heaviness of the duvet, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the other room.
It's the modern human baseline for safety.
Totally. But then your phone vibrates. It is a WhatsApp notification. You swipe down to look at it, expecting, I don't know, a late night meme from a friend, or maybe just an automated alert from a news app.
Just another hit of dopamine.
Exactly. But you see the name, and your heart physically stops. Because the name on the screen belongs to a friend who died in a car accident 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Not someone with a similar name, your friend. The one whose funeral you attended. The one you watched being lowered into the ground in a wooden casket. And they have just sent you a new voice note.
I mean, it is the ultimate collision of the absolute impossible and the aggressively, almost boringly ordinary.
It really is.
I think to really grasp the terror of this setup, we have to look at our relationship with that glowing rectangle in our hands.
Yeah.
You have this device that you trust implicitly.
Yeah, we literally give it everything.
We do. It dictates your daily schedule, it holds your banking info, it maps your physical location, and it contains your most intimate, private conversations. We view our smartphones as an extension of our own consciousness. So when that device, which is essentially a prosthetic limb for your brain, suddenly acts as a conduit for something entirely incomprehensible, it is a profound violation. It is a betrayal by the very architecture of your modern life.
And that betrayal is exactly the foundation of our mission today. In this deep dive, we are exploring a profoundly chilling supernatural horror narrative. It originates from the YouTube channel The Midnight Curator, and it's titled, "My Dead Friend Sent Me a Voice Note at 1 a.m."
It is such a good title.
Right, so we have a stack of source material detailing this exact terrifying narrative, and our goal today is to really tear it apart from the inside out. We are not just looking at this as a fun, spooky ghost story to tell around a campfire.
No.
We're dissecting it as a really sharp, devastating exploration of our modern technological vulnerabilities. We're looking at the horrifying concept of losing your very identity to a parasitic force.
A force that uses your own smartphone, your own memories, and your own voice against you. It is a brilliant piece of modern folklore, precisely because it weaponizes our everyday, unthinking digital habits. I mean, think about how many voice notes you send and receive in a given week.
Oh, dozens, easily.
Right. And think about how completely unguarded your posture is, how relaxed your mind is when you open a standard messaging app like WhatsApp.
You're completely defenseless.
You are. This narrative takes a platform built on connection, familiarity, and intimacy and transforms it into an active hunting ground. Turns a standard encrypted communication tool into a literal unguarded open door for a shape-shifting entity.
It really forces us to ask genuinely terrifying questions about the massive digital footprints we leave behind on these external servers,
Yeah, and the absolute blind trust we place in the screens we stare at every single day of our lives.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's go right to that opening moment, that 1:08 a.m. anomaly, because the psychology of this first interaction really sets the stage for the entire nightmare.
It really does.
The protagonist is completely relaxed, scrolling. The physical environment is meticulously established as safe. The bedroom, it's the ultimate human safe zone. Then, the phone vibrates.
Right, breaking the silence.
The name Ammon appears on the lock screen, and the protagonist's immediate reaction is pure visceral shock, but it is mixed with this heavy, suffocating weight of concrete reality.
Because they know Ammon is dead.
Exactly. The text makes a specific point to emphasize the undeniable reality of Ammon's death. This wasn't a mysterious disappearance. It wasn't like an ambiguous situation where he went missing at sea.
There's a wiggle room.
None. He died in a violent car accident 2 years prior. The protagonist explicitly remembers the suffocating silence of the funeral, the crying family members, the dirt on the grave.
The absolute finality of seeing his face for the last time.
Right. This isn't a case of mistaken identity in the protagonist's mind. It is a hard, cold, concrete fact of their reality that Ammon is gone forever.
And that concrete, unyielding fact is precisely what makes the notification so violently disruptive to the human psyche.
Yeah.
The human brain, fundamentally, relies on schemas. Schemas are organized patterns of thought, like these mental frameworks that help us understand and predict how the world works. Gravity pulls things down. Fire burns.
And dead people do not send WhatsApp messages from their iPhones.
Exactly. That is a foundational, non-negotiable rule of consensus reality. When that rule is suddenly broken, the brain doesn't instantly leap to the conclusion of the supernatural.
Right. It doesn't just go, oh, a ghost.
No, it doesn't say, a demonic entity is targeting me, because that would require accepting that the universe is fundamentally chaotic and terrifying. Instead, the brain scrambles for a rational life raft.
It experiences massive cognitive dissonance.
Huge amounts of it. It tries to force this impossible event back into a logical, safe framework.
Yes, the rationalization process. It is so deeply human and, frankly, so tragic to watch unfold. You can practically hear the psychological gears grinding in the protagonist's head as they stare at that screen.
Oh, absolutely.
They start whispering to themselves in the dark, this has to be a glitch. It is a server error. Or maybe his family gave away his old phone.
Maybe a telemarketer bought the recycled number.
Exactly. They are desperately, frantically trying to build a bridge back to normality. And to me, it feels like, imagine you're up in an old, dusty attic, you find a heavy wooden trunk, and inside there is a letter written by a soldier in the 1800s.
Okay, I like this.
The ink is faded, the paper is brittle, the author is centuries dead. It is a completely closed loop of history. But as you are reading this ancient letter, suddenly, fresh, wet ink begins forming new words at the bottom of the page right in front of your eyes.
Wow.
It is the violent collision of a closed, buried past and a shockingly active present. It essentially breaks the timeline.
I think that attic analogy is incredibly potent because it highlights the violation of time and permanence that digital media has created.
How so?
Well, before the digital age, our memorials to the dead were static. A gravestone doesn't change, a printed photograph doesn't move. But today, we view our chat histories with deceased loved ones as active digital memorial.
Oh, that's so true. We scroll back through them to remember their voice, their humor, the way they typed.
Exactly. But those spaces are meant to be frozen in amber. The protagonist opens the chat, and the text notes that the old conversation from 2 years ago is still there, perfectly preserved. The old jokes, the shared memes, the mundane daily check-ins.
And devastatingly, the protagonist's last unanswered message from the day Eamon died, which was just, call me when you reach.
Yeah, that single unanswered bubble of text is a digital tombstone. It signifies the exact microsecond Amon's timeline ended on this earth.
God, that's dark.
But now, right below that digital tombstone, defying all laws of nature and technology, there is a new message, a voice note, exactly 07 seconds long. The timeline hasn't just been disturbed, it has been artificially, forcefully restarted by an unknown agent.
But let's really drill down into those 07 seconds. Because the protagonist, driven by this desperate, almost sickening need to confirm their own rationalization, to prove to themselves that it's just a telemarketer or a cruel prankster, they make the fateful decision to press play.
The point of no return.
Right. They tap the little triangle on the screen. The audio starts with a burst of harsh static. Then a voice cuts through. It is low, broken, barely audible, like it is being pushed through a layer of thick water.
So creepy.
But the protagonist recognizes it instantly, down to their very marrow. It is Eamon. He whispers a single terrifying sentence, "Don't open the door."
Chills.
And the detail that the narrative hammers home here is absolutely crucial to the horror. It isn't just a voice that sounds similar to Ammon. It isn't a close approximation.
No.
It is an exact, flawless, molecular-level replication. It has the exact same pitch, the same unique cadence, the same specific human resonance that only Ammon possessed.
And the sheer precision of that mimicry is what elevates the stakes from a creepy prank to an existential threat immediately.
Right, because if it's just a bad impression.
Exactly. If the voice note sounded even slightly synthesized, if it sounded like a bad AI deepfake or a guy doing a prank impression, the protagonist's brain would reject it. They can discard it, block the number, and go to sleep.
But they can't.
No, because the replication is utterly flawless. It completely short-circuits the brain's standard defense mechanisms.
Mm,
We have to look at our evolutionary biology here.
okay, lay it on me.
We are wired as a species to recognize and inherently trust the voices of our tribe, our loved ones, our family. That recognition happens in a fraction of a second deep in the amygdala, bypassing logical thought entirely.
So we don't even think about it.
We don't. When we hear a loved one's voice, especially one communicating distress or warning, our biological imperative is to respond, to help, to lower our defenses and open the door.
Oh, wow.
By flawlessly mimicking Ammon, whatever sent that message bypasses the protagonist's logical firewall entirely and strikes directly at their emotional primal core.
And just as that 0.7-second voice note ends, just as the protagonist is sitting there on the mattress completely paralyzed, trying to process the impossibility of this flawless dead audio, the thread immediately transitions.
From digital to physical.
Yes. From the abstract digital realm of the phone into the concrete physical reality of the bedroom. From the hallway, just outside the thin wooden door of the bedroom, comes a very soft, deliberate sound. Knock, knock.
Knock.
It's so cinematic. It really is. But now I have to push back here on the mechanics of the story, or at least raise a serious question about the internal logic of it all.
Okay, sure.
If we are dealing with a vastly powerful supernatural entity, something that can manipulate digital code, spoof encrypted phone numbers, hack into WhatsApp servers, and perfectly synthesize a dead man's voice from thin air, why on earth is it knocking?
That is a very valid question.
Right. Why does a supernatural force with that level of power need to play this quaint, almost polite little game of seeking physical entry? It seems almost entirely counterintuitive compared to the high-tech digital haunting happening on the phone. Why not just manifest inside the room and kill the protagonist instantly?
What's fascinating here is how the narrative is masterfully blending very old, ancient, traditional folklore rules with our hyper-modern technological anxieties.
Okay, folklore rules.
Yeah. You're right to question the physical knocking, but think about the oldest monsters in human history. Think about classic vampire lore from Eastern Europe, or the more modern urban legends of the black-eyed children.
Oh, right. They always have to be invited inside.
Exactly. There's a universal cross-cultural archetype of the supernatural entity that is physically restricted by the concept of the threshold. It absolutely requires permission to enter a private domain. A boundary must be willingly crossed or opened by the rightful occupant of that space.
So the monster actually has rules.
Yes. This entity, despite its digital prowess, operates on a strict set of ancient cosmic or supernatural rules initially. The knocking isn't happening because the entity physically lacks the strength to break down a flimsy interior wooden door. The ducking is a highly calculated psychological tool.
It's manipulating that.
It is designed to coerce the protagonist into granting that crucial, necessary permission.
I see where you're going, but let me reframe that for a second. It is essentially a cosmic terms of service agreement.
Oh, I love that, yes.
Right. The entity can send you all the push notifications it wants, it can rattle your digital cage, but it physically cannot install its malicious software into your actual physical space until you actively click accept.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Yes, the turning of the lock is the physical manifestation of accepting the end-user license agreement of this haunting.
And in this terrifying scenario, clicking accept means walking over and turning the physical brass door handle.
And because the entity needs that act of consent, the escalation of its coercion becomes absolutely relentless.
Relentless is the word, because right after those 3 soft knocks, we get another buzz on the phone, a new 0.12-second voice note drops into the chat, and simultaneously an actual physical voice from the hallway, just inches on the other side of the bedroom door, softly says, "Open the door."
The pressure is just mounting.
It's insane. We now have a terrifying situation of dueling Ammons. We have the digital Ammon on the phone, who literally just warned the protagonist against opening the door, and the physical manifestation of Ammon's voice outside the bedroom, actively asking to be let in.
The psychological splitting, the sheer cognitive dissonance the protagonist must be experiencing right now is unimaginable.
Their brain is being torn in 2 completely opposite directions by the exact same trusted voice.
It is deliberate, weaponized cognitive overload. The entity is flooding the protagonist's sensory inputs with conflicting commands using the exact same auditory key. It is a brute force attack on their sanity. But the narrative makes a brilliant, subtle distinction here that I think is the linchpin of the horror in this sequence. The text explicitly states that the physical voice outside the door sounded exactly like Eamon acoustically, but it felt wrong.
Right, something was missing.
Exactly. It felt, to quote the text, slightly off, like a perfect copy with something missing. This introduces a profound concept, the auditory equivalent of the uncanny valley.
The uncanny valley. Yes, we usually talk about that in visual terms.
Hmm.
Visually, we know the uncanny valley is that deeply unsettling feeling you get when a robot or a CGI animation or a wax figure looks almost perfectly human, but something tiny and imperceptible is off.
Like the eyes in early CGI movies.
Exactly. The micro expressions are missing, the eyes are dead, the skin doesn't reflect light right. And instead of feeling empathy for it, it triggers a deep primal revulsion in us, a biological alarm bell that says disease or corpse. You were saying the story is demonstrating an auditory uncanny valley.
Precisely. And the auditory uncanny valley is arguably more terrifying because it is harder to pinpoint rationally.
Why is that?
Because the entity outside the door can copy the exact acoustic properties of Eamon's voice perfectly. The timbre, the resonance, the accent. But it fundamentally lacks the soul, the human essence, the emotional context behind the words.
Oh, get it.
Human speech is incredibly complex. It is filled with micro-hesitations, breath patterns tied to emotion, subtle inflections that convey intention. The mimic outside the door is just playing back an audio file. It lacks those human imperfections.
So the protagonist knows, deep down.
Subconsciously, yes. Their brain, honed by millions of years of evolution to detect predators, detects this invisible void in the sound. It recognizes the predator wearing the dead friend's acoustic skin. Meanwhile, the Eamon on the phone, the digital ghost, seems to inexplicably retain the authentic emotion, the genuine terror, the desperate desire to protect his friend.
Which brings us to the next massive escalation, the 0:18-second voice note. The protagonist plays it, and the digital Eamon's voice is clearer now, but it sounds infinitely weaker, like he is physically struggling against an immense weight.
Like he's being crushed.
Yeah. He gasps into the microphone, "Don't open it, please." There is heavy, ragged breathing, and then he delivers the most chilling clarification possible. "That's not me!"
Terrifying.
And as if the entity out in the hallway can somehow hear the phone playing, or as if it possesses a psychic awareness that it is losing the battle for the protagonist's permission, the physical knocking instantly changes character.
It drops the polite act.
Totally drops it. It goes from polite, soft knocks to sudden, explosive violence. Bang, bang, bang. The wood of the door shudders in the frame. The voice at the door loses all its feigned familiarity.
The tone dramatically shifts from a comforting friend to an unnatural, impatient, commanding predator.
It barks, "Why aren't you opening it?" Followed by, "Open the door." This time, the mask is entirely slipping off.
The mask is absolutely shattering. The entity's mounting frustration reveals its true predatory nature. It clearly calculated that using the familiar voice of a dead best friend would be an easy, foolproof skeleton key to unlock the protagonist's physical sanctuary.
It thought it would be a quick hunt.
Exactly. It expected immediate compliance born of shock and grief. But the digital warnings from the actual ghost of Eamon are actively interfering with its hunt. I think this sequence beautifully and horrifyingly captures the underlying anxiety of our modern communication landscape.
How do you mean?
Well, think about our daily lives. We often have multiple streams of digital information hitting us simultaneously. We have texts, emails, Slack messages, phone calls, social media DMs.
It's exhausting.
It is. And we are constantly subconsciously forced to rapidly assess which source is authentic, which is a scam, which is a phishing attempt, and which is a genuine emergency. We live in a constant state of information triage.
That's a great point.
Here, the story takes that modern anxiety and literalizes it, raising the stakes of that assessment to a matter of immediate life and death.
The protagonist is backed against the wall, literally shivering in the dark, staring at a door that is threatening to splinter. And then we get the 0:25-second voice note, which serves as a massive paradigm shift in the entire mythology of the story.
This is a huge turning point.
It really is. This is the moment where Eamon's ghost explicitly lays out the terrifying mechanics of exactly what they are dealing with. He sounds absolutely terrified, his breathing fast and uneven, echoing through the phone's tiny speaker. He reveals, "It copies voices, it copies memories, it's trying to get inside, it needs permission. If you open the door, it won't leave."
The rules are finally clear.
Yeah, this is the moment the narrative lays all of its supernatural cards face up on the table. We finally understand the rules of the game.
It does lay the cards on the table, but more importantly, it firmly and irrevocably grounds the horror in the specific theme of technological vulnerability.
Right.
Listen to what Eamon says. It copies voices. It copies memories. The entity is exploiting WhatsApp, a platform specifically designed for the massive archiving of shared voices, photos, text, and memories.
It's using our own data against us.
It is using this database to harvest the raw digital materials it needs to build its perfect psychological disguises. This is where the horror moves from a spooky ghost at the door to a chilling commentary on big data.
Wow, yeah. Big data as a monster.
Think about how much of our actual lives, our distinct personalities, our unique colloquialisms, our deeply private memories, and our acoustic signatures are currently sitting on server farms owned by massive tech corporations.
It's practically our entire identity.
We willingly, cheerfully upload the very essence of our identities into the cloud every single day without a second thought. The entity in this story didn't need to stalk Ammon in the physical world for months to learn his mannerisms. It likely just gained access to his WhatsApp history and scraped his digital footprint to construct this flawless auditory avatar in a matter of seconds. It is supernatural machine learning.
That is deeply, profoundly unsettling. The idea that our chat histories, our group chats, our late-night voice notes are basically just unguarded training data for supernatural mimicry.
We're doing the work for them.
We are essentially leaving the blueprints of our souls online for anything to download. But just as we think we understand the rules, just as we understand that the door is the barrier and permission is the key, the rules of this engagement are about to change without any warning whatsoever.
They always do.
Eamon is mid-sentence on the voice note, desperately warning the protagonist about keeping the door shut when the audio suddenly glitches. It distorts into a horrible screech and then cuts off completely in a dead tone.
A terrible sound.
And at that exact synchronized moment, the aggressive, violent banging on the bedroom door completely stops. There's nothing but ringing, dead silence in the house. The protagonist suddenly realizes with a sickening drop in their stomach that they hadn't actually locked the bedroom door.
Oh no.
Slowly, agonizingly, the brass handle clicks and turns halfway. It stops. The door is unlatched, but the door doesn't swing open. The entity doesn't rush in. Instead, a whisper comes right through the tiny crack between the door and the frame.
This part is so tense.
And the whisper says, "I know you're listening." But the massive twist here, the absolute gut punch that changes the entire trajectory of the story, is that the whisper in the crack of the door doesn't sound like Ammon anymore.
No, it doesn't. And this is where the story elevates from great to masterful.
It sounds exactly flawlessly like the protagonist's own voice.
This is the definitive pivot point where the narrative violently shifts away from a traditional, recognizable ghost story into something much more modern, insidious, and frankly, inescapable.
Yeah.
The entity is a learning algorithm. It realizes that the Ammon strategy, the grief exploitation vector, has failed. The protagonist's defenses are fully raised against that specific attack pattern, aided by the digital ghost.
So it just changes tactics.
So the entity simply pivots. It adapts its strategy in real time, and it does so by reflecting the protagonist's own identity back at themselves. It is a psychological escalation of the highest order.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The phone buzzes again in the protagonist's trembling hand. It is a new 0:31-second voice note. Ammon's voice returns, but he sounds utterly defeated, devoid of hope.
He knows what's coming.
He says it doesn't need the door anymore. And then he delivers the new, terrifying, ultimate rule of this nightmare. Once you hear it, it learns you. I need to introduce an analogy here because the shift in the supernatural mechanics is profound, and we need to really understand how devastating it is.
Please do.
The entity is no longer a vampire standing on the porch, politely but firmly asking for an invitation. It has fundamentally evolved. It has become a digital airborne pathogen.
Let's hold on for a second. A digital airborne pathogen.
Yeah.
I think it's a very strong way to visualize it, but let's interrogate that analogy further. Why a pathogen specifically?
Because of the vector of transmission. Look, we usually think of computer viruses or even traditional supernatural threats as requiring an active, physical, usually foolish choice by the victim.
Right, like clicking a bad link.
Exactly. You click a suspicious link in a spam email. You willingly download a sketchy file. You buy the creepy doll from the antique store. You physically turn a brass doorknob to let the stranger in. You take a definitive action to invite the threat into your system or your home.
But an airborne pathogen doesn't work like that.
Right. A biological airborne pathogen, like a highly contagious virus, doesn't need you to click anything. It doesn't need you to open a door. It just needs you to exist in the space and breathe the air.
Oh, I see.
In this story, the act of listening, the completely passive consumption of the audio waves hitting the eardrum, is the sole vector of infection. By simply perceiving the voice notes, by letting the sound waves enter the ear canal and be processed by the auditory cortex of the brain, the protagonist has inadvertently, passively downloaded this supernatural virus directly into their own reality.
That is so bleak.
They didn't consent to the download. The perception was the download.
That is a terrifying and highly accurate way to frame the mechanics of this threat. I would even push it slightly further. It isn't just an airborne pathogen, it is a parasite that feeds specifically on the currency of attention.
Oh, the attention economy.
Yes, the permission the entity ultimately needed wasn't physical, it was purely cognitive. It needed the protagonist's focus. If we map this onto our modern reality, we live in an attention economy. Every app, every notification, every media platform is aggressively engineered to hijack our eyes and ears.
We're constantly being distracted.
The idea that simply perceiving a piece of digital content, just giving it a few seconds of your cognitive bandwidth, allows it to completely rewrite your reality is a profound and unsettling metaphor for how algorithms currently shape our worldviews.
They really do shape everything.
The protagonist gave the entity their attention by listening to that very first 0.7-second voice note out of morbid curiosity. In doing so, they established a two-way data stream. They didn't just hear the entity, they gave it the acoustic data of their own environment.
Oh God, you're right. The microphone.
The phone's microphone was likely picking up the protagonist's own ragged breathing, their subtle gasps, the specific acoustics of their bedroom, and the entity used that real-time data to learn them and synthesize their voice instantly. The phone was a two-way mirror the whole time.
That makes the horror so much more invasive. And because the rules have changed, because the entity has successfully learned them through the passive act of listening, the physical wooden barrier of the bedroom door is rendered entirely obsolete. It is useless.
It's already inside.
The threat is no longer outside the room trying to figure out how to get in. It is already inside the firewall. Eamon sends a text message next, not a voice note, but just a stark, silent line of text. And I have to say, the sudden silence of a text message feels incredibly jarring and ominous after all the heavy layered audio we've been experiencing.
It really changes the texture of the scene.
The text simply says, in bleak white letters, "Don't look inside."
The shift from audio back to text is a masterful pacing mechanism by the author. When you are listening to audio in the dark, your visual senses are somewhat dimmed, right? Your brain is entirely focused on auditory processing.
You're just straining to hear.
Right. By sending a text, Eamon forces the protagonist, and by extension the audience, to look away from the localized glow of the phone speaker and actively re-engage their visual senses with the physical environment of the room. It forces them to scan their surroundings just in time to witness the subversion of the visual sanctuary.
Exactly. The protagonist looks up from the harsh light of the screen. Their eyes adjust to the gloom. They look around the familiar, supposedly safe room. They see the edge of the bed, the desk chair, the window with the curtains drawn, and then they see it.
The cupboard.
The heavy wooden cupboard door built into the wall. It is slightly open, just a crack. The protagonist notes with absolute chilling certainty that they know they closed it before getting into bed.
We all have those moments of double-checking.
And then comes the sound. A slow, agonizing creak of hinges. The cupboard door opens a few inches more, completely on its own. The text does an amazing job describing the darkness inside that cupboard. It describes it as too dark.
Unnaturally dark.
It is an impossible, heavy blackness that defies the ambient lighting of the room. The faint light from the phone and the street lamps bleeding through the curtains simply refuses to penetrate the space between the cupboard doors. It's like a localized black hole has opened up right next to their bed.
That is such a vivid image.
And then the ultimate terror. Something shifts and moves deep inside the impossible darkness.
The total subversion of the sanctuary is now complete. Look at the progression here. We started with the threat out in the abstract digital ether of the internet. Then it moved to the physical hallway, a transitional space outside the door.
And now it's in the room.
Now it has completely bypassed the perimeter and nested in the most intimate, hidden, vulnerable space of the bedroom itself. The dark closet or cupboard is, of course, a classic primal childhood trope of hidden monsters.
Right, the monster in the closet.
But here, it isn't a boogeyman. It's weaponized by a highly sophisticated data-driven mimic. That description of the darkness, defying the light, is crucial. It is a literal physical manifestation of the entity's unnatural presence, warping the fundamental laws of physics within the room. It is consuming the light just as it consumes sound.
The protagonist is entirely frozen, sitting up in bed, staring unblinking into this unnatural darkness. The phone buzzes again in their hand. A 12-second voice note. Eamon whispers, his voice barely a thread. It hides where you don't look.
So bleak.
And the absolute microsecond that audio cuts off, the lights in the room, the digital clock, the standby light on the TV, everything flickers twice and die completely.
I've got sensory deprivation.
The room is plunged into total, suffocating, absolute darkness. The sensory deprivation is immediate. The protagonist is completely paralyzed by a fear so deep it locks their joints. And then from the black void of that open cupboard just a few feet away, they hear a slow, deliberate breath.
Ugh, the worst.
A wet exhalation that is definitively not theirs. And a whisper right next to their ear, so close they can feel the warmth of it. Now I sound just like you.
That moment is the apex of the horror. It is the ultimate violation of personal autonomy, physical space, and identity. The entity has systematically bypassed all physical locks, all digital passwords, all mental rationalizations, and is now occupying the protagonist's immediate, intimate, personal bubble.
They are completely trapped.
The sudden sensory deprivation of the ambient lights going out serves to violently heighten the terror of the auditory and tactile invasion. Without vision, the protagonist's brain has nothing to process except the sound and the physical proximity of the threat.
They can't even see what's hunting them.
They can't see the monster, they can only hear it wearing their own voice, and they can feel its breath. That whispered phrase, "Now I sound just like you," is not a threat. It is a factual declaration of victory. The infiltration is complete. The assimilation has officially begun.
The physical reaction described is horrific. The protagonist says their body literally locked in place. The brain is screaming to run, but the nervous system has shut down. They can't move their legs, they can't scream, they can't even turn their head to look at what is breathing on their neck.
The fight or flight response just short-circuiting.
They can physically feel the mass of the entity standing right behind them, looming over the bed, close enough that a slight shift in weight would brush against them. The only light left in the entire world, the only tether to reality, is the faint, harsh glow of the smartphone screen still clutched in a death grip in their trembling hand.
Wow.
That tiny screen is casting shifting, unnatural blue shadows on the walls. I find it incredibly poetic and deeply tragic that the very device that served as the gateway that brought the horror into the room in the first place is now the only source of light left to them.
It's a staggering image, and it perfectly encapsulates the deep paradox of our modern relationship with smartphones. They are our constant companions, our lifelines to the outside world, our proverbial flashlights in the dark when we are scared or lonely.
We literally use the flashlight app all the time.
We do, but they are simultaneously the very tethers that bind us to the horrors, the anxieties, and the predatory algorithms of the wider world. The protagonist is clinging to the absolute source of their doom because, in the dark, it is the only thing offering even a sliver of illumination. It is a toxic dependency, literalized.
And then the phone buzzes again. In the dead, heavy silence of the blacked-out room, the vibration sound is described as painfully loud, rattling against the bones of the protagonist's hand. It is a 0.46-second voice note.
Much longer than the others.
Significantly longer. And this voice note marks a dramatic, chaotic, almost apocalyptic shift in the narrative. Eamon is no longer calm. He is no longer whispering desperate, measured warnings. The audio file starts with aggressive static, and then Eamon is screaming.
Just absolute panic.
Full-throated, tearing vocal cords screaming, "It's too late!" The audio violently cuts, glitches, distorts into digital shrieks, and when the sound equalizes and comes back, it is an absolute nightmare. Because it isn't just Eamon's solitary ghost voice anymore, it is an entire choir. It is a cacophony of the consumed.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most important question of the entire deep dive, regarding the true underlying nature of this entity.
Yeah, what is it really?
We initially thought, alongside the protagonist, that this was a specific mimic, a localized ghost or demon targeting someone using the guise of their specific dead friend, Eamon. But this 46-second audio file shatters that assumption.
It's bigger than that.
It reveals the entity to be a massive parasitic amalgamation. It is a collective. It is a hive mind constructed entirely of stolen human identities.
The text describes the audio as multiple voices, Dozens or maybe hundreds of them, all layered together, overlapping in a chaotic mess. Men, women, children, some are crying out in agony, some are whispering frantically, some are begging.
A digital purgatory.
And they are all repeating variations of the same doomed warnings. It's not me, don't listen. It learns you, it becomes you. It's like a digital graveyard that you can suddenly hear. It's a massive database of stolen souls crying out from a corrupted server.
It is horrifying.
The entity, we realize, doesn't just kill you and move on. It digitizes your terror. It absorbs your consciousness, your voice, your final moments of absolute fear, and it uses that accumulated data as bait for the next victim. And amidst this deafening cacophony of screaming victims, Eamon's voice suddenly cuts through the noise and returns one last time.
But he's different now.
But it's changed. It is eerily calm, far, far too calm given the screaming chaos behind him. He simply says, check your phone, and then the voice note ends with a hard click.
We have to assume that this calm instruction is absolutely not the good, authentic Eamon anymore. The true essence of Eamon, the piece of him that was trying to protect his friend, was likely overwhelmed and lost within that screaming choir we just heard.
So it's just the monster wearing him like a suit?
This unnervingly calm instruction is the entity itself, having fully consumed Eamon's utility, now manipulating the interface one final time. It is delivering the psychological kill shot to completely break the protagonist's mind before executing the physical takeover.
The protagonist, acting almost automatically, lowers their gaze to the glaring WhatsApp screen. The chat with Eamon is still open, but the very reality of the app's interface is beginning to unravel like bad code. The contact name at the top of the screen changes right in front of their widened eyes.
Oh, this part is so good.
The letters morph. It goes from spelling Eamon to spelling the protagonist's own name. The entity has completely hijacked the local database of the phone, but it gets so much worse.
Oh, could it be worse?
The circular profile picture next to the name updates in real time, displaying the little loading circle for a second. And when it resolves, it is not a selfie. It becomes a high-definition, live photo of the protagonist, taken from a high angle from behind, showing them sitting on the bed, clutching the glowing phone in the dark room exactly at that very millisecond.
That image is the absolute bridging of the gap between abstract digital identity theft and literal physical supernatural usurpation. In our highly modern context, we often feel that our digital identities, our curated profiles, our listed names, our uploaded profile pictures, our vast searchable chat histories are somehow more robust, more permanent, and more real than our fragile physical bodies.
We spend so much time curating them.
Right. By actively changing the WhatsApp profile to a live, impossible image of the protagonist's own back, the entity is demonstrating absolute godlike dominion over both realms. It has hacked not just the hardware of the phone, but the very fabric of the protagonist's physical reality.
It's flexing its power.
It is sending a very clear message. I own your digital self entirely, and I am currently standing right behind your physical self. You are surrounded on all planes of existence. There is no escape.
The sensory details here make my skin crawl. As the protagonist stares at that live photo of their own back, they physically feel something brush lightly against their actual spine through their shirt. Cold, impossibly slow fingers tracing the vertebrae.
Yeah, I hate that so much.
The physical presence is undeniable and immediate now. And then the entity executes its final, devastating digital maneuver. The phone buzzes one last time. A new message appears at the bottom of the chat. But it is sent from the protagonist to the protagonist.
The ultimate mind game.
It's a short 0-10-second voice note. The protagonist, completely broken and operating on sheer, terrifying compulsion, presses play. And they hear their own voice emanating from the speaker. It is perfect. It is crystal clear, entirely devoid of the subtle, uncanny valley effect that Eamon's voice possessed earlier.
The training is complete.
It is a flawless one-to-one replication of the protagonist's vocal cords. And the voice simply, calmly says, "Turn around."
The absolute perfection of the voice indicates that the entity's machine learning process is complete. The entity has fully, 100%, downloaded and integrated the protagonist's auditory identity. And I want you to notice the vital shift in the syntax here.
What's the shift?
Throughout the entire story, the entity was asking for permission. Open the door was framed as a request, a demand that required the protagonist's compliance. Turn around is not a request. It is a direct command.
And the most horrifying part is that it is a command the protagonist's physical body obeys entirely against its conscious will. The text explicitly details this horrifying internal battle. It says the command didn't feel like a suggestion they could ignore.
They're just a puppet now.
The protagonist's conscious mind tries to resist. They whisper the word no into the dark. They try to tense their muscles to fight the movement, but their limbs simply don't listen to their brain anymore. They've entirely lost bodily autonomy.
That is deeply disturbing.
The assimilation of their identity is so deep, so complete at a cellular or spiritual level, that the entity can use the protagonist's own synthesized voice to directly pilot their central nervous system. As the body forces itself to twist around, the phone drops from their numb fingers to the floor, landing face up, the screen still glowing, the microphone still actively recording.
The complete loss of bodily autonomy is perhaps the most deeply primal fear a human being can experience. The idea of being trapped inside a body you no longer control. But framing this ancient fear through the specific mechanism of a digital voice note is uniquely modern and brilliant.
Yeah, it feels so grounded in today's tech.
Think about our current relationship with technology. We are so heavily accustomed to giving voice commands to our smart devices. We walk into a room and say, "Siri, turn off the lights." We say, "Alexa, play a song." We command the hardware with our voice.
Oh my God, I do that all the time.
Here, the power dynamic is violently inverted. The supernatural entity is treating the human being as the smart device. It issues a flawless voice command, and the biological hardware, the protagonist's nervous system, is forcefully overridden and compelled to execute the program.
As the protagonist is physically forced to turn around against their will, the heavy darkness of the room seems to shift and part. They finally come face to face with the double. The entity has fully physically manifested in the space, and it looks exactly flawlessly like the protagonist.
It's looking into a mirror.
It has the same face, the exact same eye color, the same messy hair. It is wearing the exact same sleep clothes. It is a perfect mirror image standing in the gloom. But the text focuses on one horrifying detail, which is the smile. The smile on the double's face is described as wrong, too wide, too still.
The visual uncanny valley returning.
It is stretching the facial muscles past human limits. It is the physical manifestation of the uncanny valley to perfectly match the auditory one we experienced earlier. The entity steps closer, completely confident, radiating malice, and speaks aloud in the physical room using the protagonist's own voice. It says, "You listened. I only needed you to listen. Voices are doors, and you opened yours."
Voices are doors, and you opened yours. I truly believe that line is the thematic thesis, the beating heart of this entire narrative. It perfectly crystallizes the danger of our era. In a hyper-connected, constantly streaming digital world, monsters don't need physical doors to let the outside in. They don't need open windows or unlocked deadbolts. Our digital interfaces, our endless audio feeds, our glowing screens, our social media timelines, these are the modern thresholds.
They're the new front doors.
The entity didn't need to pick a physical lock. The simple passive act of giving attention, of passively consuming the digital media delivered to the phone, was the skeleton key that unlocked the mind. It highlights with terrifying clarity how dangerously unguarded our senses are when we interact with our technology. We lie in bed, assuming a level of absolute isolation and physical safety that simply, fundamentally does not exist the moment we are connected to a global network.
The protagonist's mind completely breaks at this revelation. Their legs give out from under them, and they collapse backward onto the floor, completely paralyzed, unable to formulate a thought, let alone speak or scream. The entity crouches down next to them, its face inches away, still wearing that impossibly wide, brazen smile.
It's one.
And then the narrative delivers this masterful, devastating, cyclical twist that recontextualizes the entire hour we just spent unpacking this. The entity's work with this specific protagonist is done. The assimilation is complete. The phone, lying on the floor a few feet away, buzzes one last time.
Because the microphone is still on.
It is recording automatically, picking up the ambient sound in the room. The entity stands up smoothly, walks right past the paralyzed, hollowed-out protagonist, picks up the glowing phone from the floor, and holds the microphone close to its mouth. It speaks into the device, using the protagonist's perfect, natural human voice. It says, "Hey!" It pauses, allowing for a soft, incredibly realistic intake of breath. Don't open the door.
If we connect this final, chilling action to the bigger picture we've been painting, the structural horror of this moment is astronomical. The listener and the paralyzed protagonist recognizes that exact audio message instantly.
Yeah, we've heard it before.
It is the exact word-for-word voice note that Eamon sent at the very beginning of the story. The initial 0.7-second hook that started this entire nightmare. In this one moment, we suddenly understand the entire terrifying life cycle of this digital parasite.
It was never Aemon.
It was never Eamon. It was the entity all along, wearing Eamon's stolen voice, reading from a predetermined script, playing a perfectly recorded lure designed specifically to hook the next victim's curiosity and trigger their doom.
It's an infinite loop. The cycle has completely, seamlessly restarted. The entity looks down at the terrified protagonist one last time, its wide smile never wavering. They walks calmly toward the bedroom door, opens it, and simply steps out into the house, leaving the original broken protagonist behind in the total darkness, their identity completely stolen.
Just moving on to the next.
The phone is casually dropped back onto the floor. The text implies that minutes, maybe hours, pass in dead silence. And then, the screen of the phone on the floor lights up brightly in the dark. A new WhatsApp contact window appears. A new target has been selected from the protagonist's downloaded phone book.
Spreading.
A new 07-second voice note is sent through the server. And the paralyzed protagonist, lying helpless on the floor, hears their own voice play from the phone's tiny speaker, "Don't open the door." The digital bait has been cast into the void once again.
That ending completely recasts the entire WhatsApp platform, and by extension the entire internet, as a vast, haunted ecosystem. It is no longer a tool for communication, it is a limitless digital hunting ground.
That's a terrifying thought.
In this ecosystem, this entity, and who knows how many others like it, jumps from host to host, continuously discarding old, used skins and acquiring fresh new ones. It uses the perfectly synthesized, stolen voice of the last victim to specifically exploit the love, trust, and curiosity of the next person in their contact list. It implies a never-ending, exponentially growing chain of infection, spreading completely stealthily through our encrypted networks, hiding right out in the open in the completely mundane, everyday pings of our late-night notifications.
So, what does this all mean for us? We've gone from a quiet, relatable bedroom at one point near 8 a.m. to a total catastrophic collapse of identity and reality. The expert pacing of this story, the way it meticulously escalates from a single impossible notification on a screen to a complete physical usurpation of a human life is just brilliant storytelling.
It really is a masterpiece of tension.
But beneath the ghost story mechanics, beneath the bumps in the night, it strikes a deeply uncomfortable, resonant nerve about the reality we are all currently living in.
It absolutely does. Because fundamentally, the horror of this narrative preys on two highly exploitable things. First, our inherent, deeply ingrained biological trust in the voices and faces of our loved ones. And second, our daily, completely unfiltered reliance on digital communication to mediate our reality.
We just don't question it.
We don't. We have essentially outsourced our memories, our voices, our photographs, and our deepest connections to distant servers and algorithms that we fundamentally do not control or understand. This narrative asks a genuinely chilling, modern question. If our digital footprint becomes a perfect, high-resolution reflection of who we are, what happens when something malevolent decides to step into that reflection, put it on like a suit, and wear it as a mask?
It's a terrifying vulnerability.
The entity succeeds perfectly and cleanly because the protagonist trusts the medium of the smartphone implicitly. They trusted the screen more than their own safety.
And I think that brings us to a final, truly unsettling thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. Think about classic horror for a second. In most stories, the protagonist's doom is usually brought about by some massive, obvious mistake.
Right, like going into the basement alone.
Exactly. They go wandering into the notoriously haunted house on the hill. They read a cursed, dusty book out loud in Latin. They split up from the group in the dark woods. They make a wildly foolish, classic horror movie decision. But in this story, the protagonist did none of that.
They just laid in bed.
Their total erasure, the theft of their body and soul, was caused simply by the entirely passive act of lying in their own bed, in the safety of their own home, and listening to a message from a friend on their phone. That was their only crime.
It's so unfair, which makes it so scary.
It forces you to look at that device in your hand right now, or the one sitting on your desk next to you. Think about the thousands, maybe tens of thousands of voice notes, casual texts, laughed-at photos, and location tags you have sent out into the digital void over the years.
All those data points.
Think about the massive, detailed digital echoes we all leave behind in servers and chat logs that will outlive us, and ask yourself, once you are gone, once your physical timeline ends, who or what might be waiting quietly in the static of those servers, just ready to use your perfectly replicated voice to knock on someone else's door?